You were mentioning about a walk.
Yes, I was in some woodlands near my house yesterday afternoon, and it just felt like a very natural and unforced extension of the sitting practice, in the sense that one was walking, one was breathing, one's mind was going from this thing to this thing to this thing, but in a very kind of like calm and aware way. So it was like, now I'm seeing this tree, and now I'm noticing that it's connected to this branch, and now I'm seeing how that squirrel jumped from that tree to that tree, and now my mind has been pulled up there where there's like a bird flying through the sky, and now I'm noticing what the sky looks like framed by those two trees. And then that reminds me of some other time I was in the wood, but it was just, all of that was sort of taking place within a very calm and aware space.
This
So
is basically what they mean by entering the stream. Is we're in the flow. Now, the an important point to make mention of is that when you describe that stuff, in order to describe it on the internet, you actually are conceptualizing. And so when readers or viewers see the video and hear what you said, they are probably going to hear the conceptualization, but not actually touching the experience that you're talking about. That this was actually more of an experience of being here now, while there was oh so much to be aware of that was happening in the moment. To see, for instance, how the tree was connected, it took you that long of a sentence to say it, but it happened instantly.
and it brought a smile to my face, like seeing it was all the rich connection of the place and me in that place. It it felt a lot like sitting. It felt a lot like, and you say like the flow. It felt a lot like there was this kind of like a build up of satisfaction through that awareness. It was lovely. It was really very nice.
Isn't it interesting that that's not the way that people normally walk?
Yeah.
That they walk with intention to go someplace. And even in retreats that teach walking meditation, generally, not just they, but we always fall back to some version of the Visuddhimagga, which has to do with slowing things down, where the student eventually at the slowest level is in the 7-step process of lifting and moving. So they lift up and then they move and then they raise and then they move it forward and then they set it down and then they, like that. Now that, well practiced, doesn't have to be so slow, but rather another way of thinking about it is that that's the way that the foot normally moves. That what's artificial is calling it meditation and intentionally slowing it down. That and that during walking meditation, as you're talking about, there's a whole lot more going on than just the foot movement. And so this is a more expansive way of looking at walking meditation, and yet almost everyone practices it the way that it's taught in the retreats.
It seems like not only a more expansive way of looking at walking meditation, like it's like life. If one, if that sense of like, I don't know, that sense of connectedness between sort of self and environment, and that clarity of moving through the different ways that the environment, if I don't know, if all of that can be there all the time, then that would be really nice.
There's a lot of different concepts or conceptual ways of talking about that, and you're using the word connectedness. But this is another one would be when the Dalai Lama goes to the hot dog vendor in New York and says, "Make me one with everything." In other words, this is the connectedness, and that can be done out in walking meditation. That in fact, when we're talking about walking meditation in the woods, normally there is a tune that comes up just in the background and only just a couple of notes of it. But it is in fact the entire symphony number 6 of Beethoven, which is the Pastoral. And that I imagine that he wrote that thing while he was out in the woods, kind of in that state that you're talking about. And so this is something that the human being can get in touch with when we are, like, you can do that any time, but you're saying that you did it after an especially nice sitting meditation, and that you can see that the sitting meditation then helped you to get into that state. But now that you know it's there, you don't need the sitting meditation. You can just go take your walks like that.
I'm noticing at the end of the sitting, there's like now this very rich sort of 5 minutes after opening eyes. And it's similar to what I was just describing. It's sort of walking through the woods. It's like this a few minutes after opening eyes, and it is difficult to put it into words. It's just like this very complete, fresh feeling of like, I'm seeing what I'm seeing, but it feels very just as it is. And
okay, thusness, or the wowness of this.
Yes. And it is
that's
very
what the Tathagata called himself.
Yes, gone to thusness, wasn't it? So, and that's what it felt in the woods. It felt like being in touch with the thusness of this changing process of you in this changing process of the woods, and just that like dance and interplay between those processes was just there, and it was lovely. I keep saying, and it was lovely. And it
there
was
wasn't,
lovely.
though the body complex was there, and the experience of it was there. The knowledge and understanding of both the reality of it and the glory of that reality. But still, there was no you there. Generally, when the you come, or the me that comes, is what destroys that quality.
It felt like to access it, I needed to embrace the process, like the being in process. And that's obviously a very unfixed and changing sense of individuality, or whatever you want to call it. If I had wanted to like lock down, I could feel sometimes myself slightly contracting away from the experience. And then I could really like sort of gently let that go and come back into it.
Precisely, that's exactly the practice. That when we're in that state of satisfaction, then some feelings or some thoughts or something will come up, and it begins to tighten things down. And when we become aware of that, then we can let that go and move back into that nice state of being at one with everything in a really satisfied way. Because, in fact, a few minutes ago, I was going to ask you the question. Now that if I ask you the question, you'll already have the answer ready made. And that was, when you were in that state, out in the woods, what was it that you did, or what was the point or the time when you, let us even say it this way, decided that that wasn't good enough anymore?
I suppose it's when, it's when one gets too fixed on something in that stream and starts to like hold on to it and build a little den around it. So it's like, walking, looking at the tree, feeling the tree, looking at the earth, a memory comes up. I'm aware of a feeling, I'm aware of my body, and you're in that flow. Suddenly, those things, for some reason, kind of latches a little bit more. Yeah, and as I say, you start to hold on to that. You start to kind of narrativize around it, and suddenly you are pulling yourself out of that flow.
That's the moment in time when the gal thinks about her cell phone to get it out and take a picture of the view or the setting sun or rising or whatever that she's gaga about. She stops gaga and starts wanting to take it. By literally taking a photo, what you're actually saying is, I love this out in the woods environment so much that I want it. And that's what pulls us out of it, is we begin to be the owner. And so that's where the self and the selfishness comes back in, rather than recognizing when that stuff comes, we can push that away. You can think of it in the sense of the concept of tightness or some feeling or something that comes to mind. And this is actually a really excellent point of introduction into where we had left off last time, by asking the question is, well, then what are the objects of mind? What are the contents of the mind? So long as the contents of the mind are the present moment, then we're reflecting reality as it is. But when there's something that comes to mind that is not, or let us say begins to move away from this present moment. An example of that would be, this is so nice and I remember something like it. But if that memory is short and you can come back into that state of at one-ment, then there's no problem. But if we grab hold of that old event and say, gosh, that was really nice too, and now I have lost it, and I don't have that place anymore. All I've got is this thing that once a moment ago was marvelous. Now it's just a shithole compared to my memory. And then that memory will, in fact, rob you of the present moment, because the mind has gone into the past and the self is followed right along with it. So, looking at what are the contents of the mind, one of the ways of talking about the contents of the mind are the hindrances. Because this is, in fact, in the Satipattana Sutta, in the first part of the Dhammanupassana, the first things that the student should begin to recognize as what are the contents of the mind are hindrances. Now, I would like to point out that there is a little bit more complexity in reality than what the Buddha actually talks about, in the sense that even though the hindrances are objects of the mind, one of them is in fact more the condition of the mind, but it's still a hindrance. And that is when the mind gets tired. When the mind is tired because it's not well oxygenated, or because it's It's reached the kind of tiredness for what its functions are, the same way that your arms will get tired when you're raking leaves.
Mm-hmm.
They begin to ache and they don't want to work anymore because they've come to their biological limit. And the mind can do that. And part of the sitting meditation for many students is learning how to flex the mind and flex that part of it so that that period of time that they are not in dullness can be extended. So they can sit for 30 minutes and then sit for an hour, and the mind stays sharp because they're exercising it over a period of time. But generally, the way that we look at the objects of the mind as in the beginning as the hindrances, because that's a really good way of understanding that these hindrances are actually directly related to the suffering. You can see, in fact, that the hindrances is an expansion of the second noble truth.
Mm-hmm.
Restlessness would be associated with both ignorance and ill will.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm agitated because whatever it is right now is not really good enough. Doubt, also directly related with ignorance. Also, um, the mind being tired, directly related to ignorance. Wanting things we don't have, well, there you go. That's part of the second noble truth. That's the cause of suffering, basically, are the hindrances. So, any way that we can stay out of hindrances, that will bring us back into the here now. There's really no place to go away from hindrances other than into this present moment.
Mm.
That always restlessness has to do with I got to go do something. Wanting things that we don't have always has to do with I've got to go do something. In other words, it's time oriented or future oriented. Same way with ill will or not liking something. We want to get rid of it. We want to do something about it. We want to write a letter to the editor of the newspaper, or better still, an email to that online blogger or whatever it is, you see. But wanting to do something is really wrapped up with restlessness. So, in a way, you could say that this is just a way of unraveling this ball of hindrances. Just to take a look at it, sort of like dissecting a turd. But then you recognize that you can put it right back together again and it's still all turd. And so this is the kind of way of looking at the hindrances. And this, when we understand them fully, that's what brings us to that state of, wow, it is so nice to be out of that and into the here nowness that you were experiencing on that walk. And so we can see that there's a lot of different concepts that are talked about it from a wide variety of different ways in the Tibetan or the Zen or all of these other various ways. We all have each individual concept to talk about something that cannot be conceptualized. Even Lao Tzu knew that. The opening line of his Tao Te Ching is the Tao that can be spoken. It's not the Tao.
Mm.
But the Buddha was quite excellent at being able to say things with words that cannot be said with words. And so this is where he has come up with this concept of these hindrances. And in Sutta number 49, no, excuse me, Sutta number 39, there is a long description about what it's like to be free from these hindrances. And they go something like this, that if you were in the hospital, if you were sick, and then you recovered, you feel a whole lot better after you've I mean, checking out of the hospital is a really nice experience for most people. I may not be completely well, but I'm well enough to get out of here. Another one is like being in jail. And in fact, Bhikkhu Buddhadas has got a marvelous little talk called The Prison of Life. Well, when the mind is in the hindrance, it's very much like being in jail. Mm-hmm. And the jail is the one that we create for ourselves that prevent us from having freedom. The freedom, in fact, to experience that walk. So if someone's walking down the same path that you're walking down, perhaps at a slightly different point in time, but his mind is full of hindrance, rather than because you had been sitting in meditation and having your mind pretty well clean, lots of tissue. Sati is the tissue. Mm-hmm. And so we keep cleaning and cleaning and cleaning, and then we get the mind into that state so that it can go a while, free from hindrance, so that we can experience the here now. So it's like getting out of jail. It really is getting out of jail, because now you are free to experience the present moment. Mm-hmm. Another example of it is being in debt. You owe money. You owe a mortgage. And every so often, you've got to cough it up. Or we also worry about when we're in debt. Just as a side point, I don't even care what the answer to the question are, but just to get you to think about it. Are you in debt for anything? You owe a car payment? How about a house payment? Anything like that?
Yeah, mortgage
payment. Okay. How do you think you'd feel if you were finished with that debt?
I would feel good.
Yeah, however, okay. Now you know what we're getting at here. In fact, you can actually, when I talk about it, you can actually feel a tightening. Mm. Is that not true? Can you not feel that? So you actually tightened up when I started getting personal. Mm. Stop talking about it about Uncle Sam's debt, because that doesn't bring on that anxiety the way that are you in debt. So I tricked you into being selfish there. We could have never talked about Uncle Sam, but then that wouldn't have given you that little hit of experience. So yes, when we are in debt, getting out of debt is now the intention. Except with the mind, because it's so fast, we can get right out of debt anytime we want to. That in fact we're not indebted. Those payments that you make, you've made them all this time. You know for sure that you can make them. You've got that confidence.
It's also they're not you. That payment is not you. I think the reason why debt can feel very difficult for people is it feels like you are giving of yourself to that thing. You have to give yourself, and you have a limited self, and you have to give some of it away every month.
You're like, Shakespeare had Shylock. And that's exactly what it is. Paying a debt is very much like giving out a pound of flesh. It's me that I have to pay. Mm. Rather than looking at it from the sense of easy come, easy go. Because you are not the money. And that we should stop worrying about money completely, because you're not the money. And yet somehow from childhood we get the idea that I am the buck. That when I receive the paycheck, it's me that's getting the paycheck. It's not you that's getting the paycheck. At best, it's the bank that's getting it. And you let them be the steward. And so you don't have to worry about it anymore. And so that's part of being free, is being out of debt. And one of the most important ways that we can be out of debt is by stop thinking about money. Mm. Oh, yeah, just don't think about it. Because when we think about money, we're in debt. When we're not thinking about money, we're not in debt. Do we have enough, etc., like that? Always worry, kind of restless. Then there is the traveler. And I see these poor folks on the boat have to go on a regular basis to um, Koh Samui once a year for visas. And now we've got a different way of doing it. So we take the ferry over in the truck. And now we've got transportation. But on the high-speed catamaran is where all the tourists are. And every one of them has way too much baggage. And therefore, you have to travel in groups to keep track of all the baggage because no one can carry all of his baggage all of the time. You can't do it in the seat. You can't do it in the airplane and things like that. You have to check it in and all that kind of stuff. And so all of this baggage that we have on a journey. Well, the Buddha talked about that in the sense of a caravan that's crossing the desert. And you can have camels with bad feet. You can have water getting problems. You can have thieves come in. You can have all kinds of stuff that even though you're well prepared, it's dangerous. But when you arrive home, or at least into a safe place, maybe an oasis, you feel safe. Now that burden of all of the things that you own, you can set down. So it's basically like arriving at home. Well, we can think of all of the thoughts that you could think about. It's just baggage. And it's a prison. And so another one, in fact, the last one of the group, is being a servant. Imagine that you were a bonded or indentured servant, or in modern times, you're just an employee. And you got to get up at a certain time and go to a certain place and do a certain thing, whether you want to or not. And you do it day in and day out and day in and day out. And when you do that, you're nothing but much more than a draft animal for the society. But wouldn't it be nice if you don't have to work? And if you don't worry about money, you don't have to think about money, then money's not a problem either. And so when you give up the hindrances, you can actually quit your job and be happy instead because you don't have to go to work. Except that that's not really the point. The point is whether you go to a job or not, is can you enjoy it moment by moment? Can you step out of the woods in that mental state that you were in when you were in the woods and carry it into your job also during that time? So I'm not recommending everybody quit their job immediately, just when they stop worrying about money. So when you come out of debt in your mind, then you can also come out of the servitude, because in fact that's the whole point of indentured servitude is that we owe somebody something. And we've got to work it off. And that's part of the society. That's the way that humans operate. And in fact, one of the things that these servants would really love is someday I'm going to be the boss and they're going to be indebted to me.
There's a quote from a book I like. Says the main character gives another character some advice. Says, neither a servant nor a master be. The idea being that kind of both of those things are actually as unfree
They're
as each other.
Suffering. Yeah, right. They one's on the end, this teeter-totter end, and the other one's on the other end. Yes, exactly.
See that I don't put too much worried. I try not to put too much worried thought into it, but that kind of line between, do I want to organize my life so that I have less and less responsibility to, say, professional responsibility, work responsibility, Or do I want to organize my mind so that I can approach my professional responsibility with lightness and a smile and do good in it? Because when I'm in that latter place, teaching is an absolute joy. I love being in a class with 10-year-old kids, teaching them about space and, you know, how to write letters, and about apartheid in South Africa, and about geography, and about, you know, I love it. When I'm not in that space,
if you can teach them your joy, they will have an immense amount of the things that they would have gotten whether they got space and the curriculum or not.
Yeah.
That's something that our teachers just don't know how to teach. But if you're learning to do that, then you can begin to teach the kids that. They don't have to spend long hours in sitting meditation to do this, because they're not as screwed up as you are, because they're not as old as you are yet. And so doing things with them to keep them in the here now, just like you're doing things for yourself to keep yourself in the here now, is one of the objects that you can have for your employment rather than a paycheck to pay your debts. Well, now you can begin to see that, wait a minute, these hindrances are actually directly related to the way that we relate to the outside world.
So it's a fine line, isn't it? On the one hand, you want to act in such a way that your own personal outside world is conducive to a life where you are, you know, letting go more and more of these hindrances. But the other side of that, the other side of that coin is, I mean, I find it easy in the past. I've done this quite a lot, where it's like focusing so much on that actually you are building up a lot of hindrance. You're building up a lot of aversion to your present life by imagining a version of your life wherein you get to be free. Do you know what I mean? So
exactly,
what do I need to do
now to be free, rather than what can I plan on doing to get myself free?
Because and yet one can act skillfully to set things up so that the external are working for you as well. So it's like a fine line, isn't it? You've got to do both skillfully.
Right. But that skillful means is actually coming out of the wisdom that you're looking at it, because you're paying attention to really what's going on rather than paying attention to how you feel about it. And most people spend all their time paying more attention about how they feel about things than paying attention to actually what's going on, including paying attention to these feelings you're having. In other words, many, many people either love or hate Donald Trump, and neither group can see really what's going on. And the answer at that level is, well, we really don't know what's going on now, do we?
In both cases, you're beholden as well. If you hate something, you are beholden to it in the same, not dissimilar way to if you love something.
Right. And by the identification with a particular group or a political party, then when that party has a good day, you have a good day, but that's not going to last. In fact, way politics is going right now, in any one given day, either party is going to have some ups and downs, and there you go with it. So you feel bad every time something bad happens to that party, if that's the one you're attached to. But if something happens bad to that party, then you feel good because you're attached to the other party, and they're the ones who think that it's good. Anything bad happens to the group is good for me. That's the whole competitive way of looking at the world that is a hindered way of looking at the world. But right now, one group is feeling like they're experiencing loss, and that they feel like that they have to conserve what they've got, no matter how badly they act in order to gain it, to keep it.
Mm.
Like, for instance, the Republicans meddling in uh, voter roll and all of that kind of stuff that nobody wants to have just a fair, easy game. They're always trying to take second base and substitute there a bag of cement instead. So here's the point, though, is that if we can get the mind free from hindrances, then what are worthwhile objects to put into the mind? Because this is, in fact, where Anapanasati and the Satipattana kind of diverge. Because the Anapanasati is looking at process in the Dhammarato, and that process is to see the anicca, see how things keep changing, and then relinquish control for them, or letting go of everything because it's always changing. Nothing is worth clinging to, as I nearby, because it's dangerous to cling to that stuff. It's in a state of rot.
Can I describe to you at the moment how I practice kind of going from third to fourth tetrad, and you can tell me whether you think, or what you think about it, kind of on a practice, because I am really interested. I haven't really had specific guidance from anywhere really about how to practice that fourth tetrad. For me at the moment,
well, number one is remove the hindrances so that we got a blank slate, and then we can start to write something wonderful on it.
So that it feels like that is what happens. It feels like the first three tetrads are all building up to that, aren't they? And it feels like you're letting go of the hindrances at kind of slightly different levels with each of those first three tetrads. By the time the third tetrad is there, by the time you've kind of deeply been in your body, calmed your body, deeply been in lovely, pleasing, satisfying emotions, and then calmed the emotions. You know, I'm loving that calming step at the end of the first two tetrads. I'm loving kind of deeply experiencing, investigating the body, and then just coming to the breath and just letting it all calm. I'm loving deeply feeling and investigating that piti and that sukha, and then just finding somewhere a bit lower in the body and just letting it kind of all calm. And then that feels like that quite naturally gets you to a very still place where suddenly it feels like you're in a more expansive, still, bright mind space. And it feels like you have to deeply experience the body, you have to deeply experience the feelings in order to arrive at that at mind. Like the connections are, you know. Anyway, so then in mind, I experience that space, that brightness, that expansiveness, that stillness. And then from there, I allow a more refined feeling of gladness to kind of flood that space. And then I kind of come back to the breath very quietly, but closely, and able to kind of be with it. And it feels like from a kind of concentration, I know you don't love that word, perspective, that's the kind of most concentrated moment in the practice for me. And then the letting go, it's like a deep exhalation out, and all intention to hold to any sort of concentration goes. I often feel a very almost like an expansive rushing state through my body when that's let go of, like my body's expanding. And then from there, I kind of allow that expansion to reincorporate body, feelings, and mind. And there's no longer any preference for any of the three. And I also know, I don't think you love this phrase either. I've heard you not very keen on it, choiceless awareness. So basically, at that point, I let go. I think maybe it's used different, but at that point, I let go of any intention to be with feelings, to be with body, to be with mind. And I watch the mind, like that flow state described in the woods. I watch it go to this feeling, and then I watch it let go of that feeling and go to this body sensation. And I then hear something from outside, and suddenly it's like this. So this now for me feels like this is how I practice the first step of the fourth tetrad, is allowing the mind to like zoom out, or allowing the whole being to kind of zoom out, and anything that comes in and out of awareness, just allow that to happen, whether it's a sound, whether it's the kind of beautiful visuals I'm seeing on the back of my eyelids, whether it's the feeling of the breath, whether it's, or the feeling of the breath is kind of the default one, and then something else comes and I'll hold that, and then I'll let go of that, and then there'll be back to the breath, and then there'll be a feeling, and then there'll be a breath, and then there'll be a memory, and then there'll be a breath. And it kind of feels like, yeah, that's how I currently practice that step. And then at a certain point, I try and allow the fading and the cessation. My way of understanding that is like, I try and feel the central point which experiences all of those things. I try and just allow the volume of that central point, which I understand is essentially a misleading concept that I haven't let go of yet. I try and allow that just to dial down. And that's when the kind of thusness of that experience potentially kind of expands.
Yes, okay. At that point, this is where Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about that the wowness of it, or the gaga, melts into real satisfaction. That the rapture of the piti becomes sukha, and that the satisfaction then becomes slightly more important than the success. Because if you can do something over and over and over again, then the success is almost expected. And so the feeling of success is not so strong, but the satisfaction of it is there. And this can be had with playing games on the computer or anything. That when we begin to play, let us say, a new game at an expert level, and that we're worried throughout the game, am I going to win or not? But once you become expert at that game, then you know that you're going to win. And then when you do, you still feel satisfied, but you don't feel elated because you already know that you were going to win. Now, that happens in many cases, and another example of that, perhaps, is riding a bicycle. But in the beginning, there became a point when there was a lot of, yeehaw, I can do this. But after that, there's just a satisfaction that I can ride the bicycle, because that heavy high has kind of mollified or settled down, which is, I think, exactly what you're describing there. Okay. So now the basic question is, now that we've got this mind fit for work, what am I going to apply it to, and how are we actually going to sustain that? Now, in general, I tell the students, go for the wholesome, because the unwholesome is going to be hindrance, and that's your choice, either hindrance or wholesome. But the Buddha was actually quite specific about it in the Satipattana Sutta. And in fact, there are two Satipattana Suttas. One of them is in the Dhinga Nikaya, and that's the one that they call the Maha Satipattana Sutta. And then there is one in the Madhyama Nikaya that is the Satipattana Sutta. Now, when I told this to Robert, he goes to check the Thai, and he's confused because they're the same sutta in the Thai. Basically, what they did is they threw out the shorter one and plugged in the longer one in the Madhyama Nikaya. Now, when that happened centuries ago, we're not sure. I'm also not sure about the very deep detail because I haven't gotten, and I guess I could go do the research. But when I'm looking at it just in English and it's translated by two different translators, it's fairly understandable that they're talking about the same thing, but I'm not sure that it's a word by word, line by line same up until the point when they change. But there is a point when they change, and that is because in the Satipattana Sutta, the expose on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path is extended to the point that it's about half the sutta.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the way that it's talked about in this order. Number one is the hindrances, which is where the Anapanasati Sutra spends most of its time. To let go of that stuff, to relinquish it, to get it out, so that now that we have the mind clean to do these other things. The first item on the list is the five aggregates. Now, the five aggregates are taught by the Buddha in, gosh, dozen or more places that I know of. I know I've seen it in the Samyutta Nikaya. Um, there's a long port, in fact, about the last half of the sutta, number 22, talks about this in detail to where it's just kind of mentioned within a paragraph in the Satipattana Sutta. So it doesn't go into detail. But here's basically is what's going on is that we're doing a review of the Satipatthana, but we're doing it in the sense of, well, it has the body, the feelings, but for the mind, it breaks it into consciousness, into perception, and into sankhara. So you could say that the sankhara would be kind of the objects of the mind, but perception and consciousness are actually the functioning of the mind. So the five aggregates are nothing but a restatement of the four foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to inspect the mind in a little bit deeper way, in the sense of all of these things, starting with the body, with all of the work that we've done, with all the Anapanasati, with all the watching and the calming and the experience in the body, one of the things we know for sure is that you are not the body. And that we can see that as an intellectual, but we can also begin to experience it to where you can also see that most people, they don't have a clue. We could go so far as to say is look at the number of industries that have spawned because people identify I am the body. The fashion industry, the sports clothing industry, even sports itself. Also makeup, clothing, all of that kind of stuff has to do with, now there is basic clothing that you can go buy. In fact, you could say how China was in 1949, where everybody wore the same stuff because they could only afford to keep making the same thing with the same color over and over again. So everybody was dressed the same because that was the only clothes that were available. And in that regard, nobody was very much attached to the clothes other than I don't like it, which is an attachment itself that they wanted better clothes to wear. So we attach to the body that when the bug bites, it's me that itches. And yet Jesus was spot on about it, and the Buddha also, when Jesus said that you cannot change your stature, not even an inch. But to go further than that, you can't control its aging. You can't be young one day and old the next. A boy this year and a girl the next. So people have done some stuff with surgery and whatnot like that, but you can also generally see there's a whole lot of emotional baggage involved with I am the body, whether I'm a girl or a boy, and I've decided that I want to be this and that instead of just being naturally who I am, right? Which is basically not attached to the body. In fact, the attachment to the body gives rise to Hollywood, the movies, the movie stars, the magazines, all of that stuff about beauty. And you can see that that beauty of I am the body is actually somewhat related to sensuality or sexuality, as if I'm handsome, I'll get laid. But intellectually, we know that that's not necessarily the case. A whole lot of the ugly dudes get laid, but they still worry about being handsome.
I suppose it's when attachment to the body and how other people perceive you becomes your source of emotional okayness, or becomes your source of validation. I can only feel okay if it,
And we use the body.
I can only feel okay if.
And we use the body for competition, for fighting, or for playing a sport. And when the winner wins, they feel good, I am good. And when the loser loses, he feels bad, I am bad, because they lost the game. And it gets especially worse when they're betting money on it, or it becomes professional, because now doubt and debt about money and performance and all of that stuff gets wrapped back into it. But breaking it down to just this body, you are not this body, because you are not, in fact, in control of it. So it's not yours. At best, you can think that I live in this old house, but in that regard, this old house owns me. When the toilet is broken, that old house decides it's me that has to fix it. So the body is like that too. That is actually a habitat, it's a place to live, but it's got to be kept up. And in that regard, if there's any me in there, it's the body that owns the me, not me owns the body.
Yeah, one of the things I love about sort of the practice of Anapanasati is I feel like sometimes certain descriptions of Buddhist attitudes towards the body can seem very negative, whereas actually the practice of Anapanasati Sutra, I feel like it frees you from identification with the body, and in the process shows you how to enjoy being in the body.
Right, to enjoy your house, but you don't own it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you spend all day painting it and worrying about what it looks like compared to the other houses on the street, you're not going to enjoy just being in the house.
Right. I am the house means it's got a lot of work to do. You know, got to take care of it and whatnot.
Dhammarato, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to end the call there because of the time I have to go and do some of that high quality parenting that we were discussing last week.
Okay.
We're on the aggregates.
Right, we're on the 5 aggregates. We just started with the first one, and you can just summarize it. All the rest of them, feelings, they are not you.
Yeah.
That in fact you are often run around and controlled by the feelings.
I'm gonna do a little bit of reading and experiential investigation of this idea of the aggregates, and next week I'll give you a call and we can kind of pick up from here.
Okay.
Does that sound okay? I'm sorry to have cut us short. I feel like we could have kept going, but I must go, and I've very much enjoyed our conversation today.
The viewers will get tired after an hour anyway. So. Yes. Mañana.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Be well.
Thank you for sharing your experience too. That's quite valuable.
Thank you. Take care, Dhammarato.
Okay, bye.